the one parallel that came to my mind for a lot of what your discussion in American history was the Know Nothing Party. And the general core tenet of that party was anti-Catholicism. And when you look at the arguments that were made against Catholics in the United States, it was that they supported a foreign leader who was going to subvert democracy and freedom in the United States, even describing Pope Pius IX as having crushed liberal revolutions in Europe, and that they were going to import that to the United States. When you look at prohibition, Catholic opposition to prohibition was viewed as degeneracy and weakening American morals.
Sure.
When you look at political campaigns of Catholic leaders, it wasn't until JFK that you had a major national political leader win an election being Catholic. When you look at the history of Catholicism in the United States, it's one of the intolerable acts of the American colonies was the Quebec Act, which granted religious toleration to Catholics in British colonies. So when you hear the history of anti-Catholicism in the United States, it's one of saying that they cannot integrate. Their values are not our own. And I think that when you look nowadays, those arguments would seem obscene and antiquated. So if the United States and Europe was able to get past anti-Catholicism and was able to integrate people who they thought were fundamentally incompatible with their beliefs, why is Islam fundamentally different?
Very good question. I just had a couple of things. One is, by the way, we've just had in the UK our bonfire night, as it's called, the 5th of November, where we still burn Guy Fawkes' effigies on bonfires. And there was another BBC documentary about Guy Fawkes, which reminds one, among other things, that there were quite a lot of Catholics who actually did want to subvert the state in Britain and elsewhere. The wars of religion that racked Europe for a very long time were not invented by people. The wars of religion existed because the Christian communities in Europe were not only vying for religious purity, but vying for power. And certainly in Britain, where we alternated between Catholic and Protestant monarchies, the idea that Catholics actually did want something, that is, it wasn't just, I mean, we have this very strange modern idea whereby the contents of belief are basically not important. It's the thing I sum up as being the prevailing mood of our time, which is that I may do Islam, you may do Christianity, you may do yoga, and it all sort of comes out the same in the end. And I think there's a lot of evidence that that's not the case. And in any case, as I say, the contents of what is being argued for would still matter. And it's true that there have been cases historically, definitely have been cases historically, where people have totally illegitimately been suspected of trying to subvert the state to have not done so. And I don't say, by the way, and I didn't say that it's the case that Islam or Muslims can't integrate into it, just as Catholics, just as Jews, in some countries, where you go with rather famous, all sorts of things that went wrong there. But I don't say that Islam Muslims can't. I'm saying that it's a bit that is clearly proving hardest to swallow in the whole, or digest, I should say, in the whole melting pot. And so it is worth remembering the historical parallels, not least to keep ourselves in check. But they don't exactly run parallel.
Sorry, I just one more comment regarding that. When you look at the wars, in the example of the wars of religion in Europe, it wasn't decided by Protestants triumphing over Catholics or Catholics triumphing over Protestants. It was decided by the Peace of Westphalia, which said each prince may have their own religion. So to the idea that the concept of people having their own beliefs is modern, I think when you look at religious conflict in the past, it was resolved by allowing people to have their beliefs.
Yeah, absolutely. But look, just In Britain, still, the monarch cannot marry a Catholic, okay? Prince William, if he'd have chosen a Catholic as his wife, he couldn't have done it. Because it is viewed as being so important that that the presiding head of a Protestant country remains a Protestant. So you're right, the Treaty of Westphalia sorts out one issue of it, but it by no means puts aside the wars of religion. It settles one aspect of it.
There were big waves of immigration in the past, and I remember the last one in Germany, the Turkish immigration in the 70s and 80s. They got perfectly assimilated, and today they're German citizens. But today it seems that that is not possible.
I quibble with one bit of that, which is that the idea that the 70s and 80s Turkish immigration to Germany were totally integrated. Look, I mean, it goes back slightly to the Catholic point earlier. President Erdogan, Sultan Erdogan, who I'm very glad to say is a close enemy of mine, and a reason I can't go to Turkey anymore, sadly. But Erdogan actually came to Europe again 5 years ago to give a speech to tens of thousands of German, Dutch, and Belgian Turks, and said to them again, publicly, amazing speech. He says, "We need you here," and he encourages them to have lots of children. And he says, "We need you to be in Europe, but do not become Europeans. Get yourself involved in politics, but don't become like them, because we need you for Turkey." Now, again, if you imagine that in the Catholic or any other historical context, it would be a legitimate moment for people to worry about subversion. And that, I think a lot of evidence from Germany suggests that a lot of those Turkish migrants, yes, they came, they contributed to the German economy, all sorts of things, but I think it's a stretch to say they became as German as anyone else.